Having begun in a good way, I can feel invigorated knowing that this is going to proceed in a very positive direction, and it's going to be the best that the Creator wants for us. And so it's a guided. I now know it's guided and blessed. We've asked for the necessary guidance and direction, and so we'll move on forward. Galen Knight is our first presenter this morning, and a little bit of a story about how he got to be a keynote presenter at this conference. Last year, we had him just filling in a little panel scenario where we had a panel on medicinal herbs and people that worked with medicinal herbs, and we knew that Galen worked with medicinal herbs, and thought, let's put this guy in. He's not a real traditionalist, but he has a lot of knowledge to share in this field. So we put him in on a panel, and immediately after that panel, it was like questions would not end. It's like I had to kind of hustle that panel off the stage and kind of put it over there, and that would seem like a conference all by itself. And I said, oh my gosh, he must have said something. Maybe we ought to make him a keynote presenter or something. So we brought him back, this time as a keynote presenter, and I will give you some warning. Galen Knight is not your average everyday herbalist. He too has his credentials. He's got a PhD in chemistry, and actually I think he is probably the foremost chemist in sulfur chemistry. I don't really believe there's another man on the planet that knows more about sulfur chemistry than this particular individual. And of course that don't mean anything to you right now, and I'm doing this to lead up to the fact is, do not try to follow his presentation as if though he was talking to, as if you had to. This is not, you're not going to be tested at the end of his presentation to see how much you have retained. He is going to present an awful lot of high-level chemistry. Do not attempt to follow it. It is extremely academic, but it is important. We asked him to continue to do that because it has to be on record. There is a lot of skepticism about herbal medicine, traditional medicine. They say, oh, that's all voodoo and folklore and all of this. Finally, we found someone that can express the voodoo and folklore in a language that they can't dispute. And so it is important that that language be there. But for you, it's not there for you. You follow the conclusions, and you'll be just fine. So with that preface, I'm going to turn it over to Galen and let him do the magic that he does so well.
I keep telling Patricio not to embarrass me because I embarrass easily. But now he's told you not to listen to me, so it's all fixed. Yeah. Okay. A little higher. Okay. I've got too many gizmos here, so hopefully this is on a timer, and it'll hopefully proceed along quite nicely here. If you make a note of our email address, telephone, or anything like that, I don't have a lot of cards, and there aren't any on the little handouts of the Townsend letter update. That a few of them are circulating through the audience. Please, if you have internet access, take our website down and leave the hard copy for other people to read through. This was Rick Savage and Seneca Savage helped me write this and tone down some of this stuff a little bit. So Patricia's comments are well taken. Most chemists have trouble following this, but I wanted to present it so that you understand that we've done a lot of thinking about this and explored a lot of things so that the conclusions are, we have good confidence in the conclusions. And the University of New Mexico sued me for 6 years trying to get control over this, which they did. after they got it, they didn't know what to do with it because they didn't understand it well enough to implement it. But I want to provide you all with a little encouragement because this summer we turned loose. We gave them away 6 million doses of the most potent substance that we're going to talk about for immune support for cancer patients. And you'll see how effective this is as we go along. I apologize for the sunglasses, but I think it's important to stay on track that I move through this as quickly as possible. Haven't had time to fix the sight thing yet. I'd like to open this with a little remark. There's one copy of a letter that was sent to me as inspiration by the elders of the Lakota Sioux right before University sued me and before my spouse started hanging out with her girlfriend for 24/7. And so if anybody wants to talk to me about that story, that in itself is a bit of a miracle, how they even found me to send me that note. But please do that some other time, and let's stay on track with the information that we need to present and that hopefully you'll appreciate. I'd like to start with a poem by Robert Frost. It's called Nothing Gold Can Stay. And the reason for this is we're going to be telling you today that gold needs the same antidote as mercury, nickel, and all the other carcinogenic metals that we're talking about. Our whole society today is based upon gold. In that sense, the greed for gold is got our whole society rotten to the core because it is as toxic as some of these other substances in terms of poisoning our body. Anybody hear of the gold fever of the 49ers? Where you're working in a hole for 10 years with some guy, and all of a sudden one day you click, and you get toxic enough with the gold dust from the mine, you kill your partner and eat him in some cases. So maybe they were hungry, but maybe there's something else amiss going on there that is a problem. Anyway, nature's first green is gold. Her hardest hue to hold, her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. The leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank in grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. At last year's conference, and a Native American from the East Coast after the panel came up to me and said, our elders have prophesied that the white snake will eat its own tail. Nothing gold can stay. So with that 2-minute introduction, I'm going to give you a lot of scientific information, things that we've gleaned from all sorts of databases all over the country. There's one particular good one by Jim Duke in the USDA. It's called ars-grin.gov/Duke. If anybody'd like that website, I'd be happy to give it to you afterwards. So off we go. Vitality Therapeutics is a nonprofit organization. We've been doing research since '94. None of the people working with us ever take salaries for anything that we do. And hopefully I'll be able to start this thing. And what we're trying to do is identify a bunch of problems for people and solutions. So a dozen years ago, we were telling people about toxic metals and warning them about the adverse effects they have upon us. Metals, it turns out, activate estrogen receptors 2 to 6 times in breast cancer, human breast cancer cells. And bismuth, that we'll be talking about, is in makeups, ladies. The natural minerals, they may be natural, but they could be deadly as well. Hold on a second. I got this on a timer to keep me going through it. Oh, wrong remote. Like I said, I got too many controls. I look confused already, don't I? But one of the biggest problems is by polluting Mother Earth, we're actually causing organisms in our body that are in the raw sewage that also are polluting it to become toxic and more toxic to us, and making them methylated toxins that wind up in the fat. And so we're going to be talking about how these poisonous, how we can avoid, or how we can recognize these, how we can avoid their deadly combinations, and how we can nutritionally mitigate these problems. The list is pretty phenomenal. You have plutonium, bismuth, mercury, silver, copper, lead, cadmium, cobalt, tin, nickel, zinc, thallium, iron, and magnesium. They all poison sulfur chemistry, and they do it in a way that probably is additive. So if you get toxic with one of these or a number of them, which we all are by the time we're 40, they cause problems. Now, curiously enough, these same metal toxins activate human breast cancer cells and increase the division of these breast cancer cells by 2 to 6 times. This is a very serious problem. Underwire bras are often made of stainless steel or nickel. They absorb straight into the breast, and if you can't sweat them out because you're using aluminum antiperspirants, they sit in the breast and give your breast cancer. So antiperspirants are a problem. This data was published in 2003, and it essentially corroborates everything that we've been warning people for a dozen years about the toxicity of metals. So we found it very encouraging that we're on the right track. And I think I can speed this up a little bit too. As it turns out, nickel is just as toxic in this regard as estrogen, which is very interesting because estrogen is already associated with an acceleration of breast cancer. But other metals on our list of toxins, as we'll see, also are known to bind to these estrogen receptors and activate them. This is a very serious matter. We're all toxic. Native Americans, for the most part, with the exception of the Aztecs and the Incas, were using, not metals to cut with, but their obsidian knives and tools, which are much safer in many respects. Now, the interesting thing about these is we actually found evidence in the literature that these microbes in our environment are methylating these compounds to get rid of them, but when they do that inside of our bodies, the methylated compounds actually accumulate. So this particular abstract is interesting because arsenic and bismuth are both methylated. Antimony is almost as toxic, if not more toxic, than plutonium. So these are very serious substances. So part of the control here has to be to control these microorganisms that are evolving in our polluted environment. The best way to do that is to clean up the environment and stop polluting it. And we have a mandate to do that now. We're just not doing it. So the way these organisms work, these are abstracts of scientific articles, is when they methylate it, they do that so that they can blow the toxins off away from them into the atmosphere and get them out of their environment. But when they do that inside of us, those toxins accumulate in our fat and cause cancer. Remember, fat is a predisposing factor for virtually every disease of industrialized society. The thing that is most critical here that gets poisoned is made from the amino acid cysteine, which is right here in this part, and beta-allothine, which comes from pantothenic acid or vitamin B5. So all these different molecules that are different combinations of breakdown products of this one molecule, beta-allothine, is very important. This just diagrams out how cysteine and pantothenic acid feeds into this cycle and then is cleaved to form beta-allothine. Acetyl-CoA also feeds into this cycle. So for those that have alcohol problems, because alcohol goes into this substance right here, you might think that would feed this, but actually it traps it in this form and poisons the kinase. So different people have different sensitivities to alcohol. And if you accumulate too much acetyl-CoA, this pathway shuts down. We were able to identify the enzymes that have the beta-allothine molecule binding to them and then splitting out vitalithine right on its enzyme receptor, the monooxygenase. We're going to be talking a lot about this today because the monooxygenase and vitalithine are poisoned by chemical warfare agents. That's what kills people that gets exposed to these things. That's how deadly things that poison this are. That's why these metal toxins are so much of a problem. Now, we actually found vitalithine at Los Alamos, sitting right on this enzyme. So we know the substance is in mammalian species. We know that it's controlling virtually every pathway in the body. And we know that metal toxins and the other toxins we're going to be talking about today are poisoning that. The best way to avoid these is the clean living that everybody at this conference is wedded to and that we've been talking about. And thank God for the Tusuki Pueblo people that have enabled this to happen. One of the first things that we did was an experiment in myeloma, which is a cancer of B cells. Right off the bat, we got 100% survival of a cancer of the immune system. And as it turns out, we're using the good B cells to kill the bad B cells. So it's the most selective thing that we've ever run across in terms of an anti-cancer agent. All the controls, or 75% of the controls would die. We had 100% survival in our first experiment. Then we went to a even more deadly melanoma model, which is the definition of melanoma. And I'll spend some time on this, so I'm going to get ready to back it up. It turns out that all the controls died. It's uniformly fatal here. And as we increased the natural vitalithine, or a new Trojan horse variety of this that we're going to be talking about, we actually had mice living lifetimes at 70% of them at lifetimes, as long as mice that didn't have cancer lived. So I was able to completely do away with this, and it's so simple. We just give 4 injections at 2-week intervals and stopped altogether at 10 weeks when these mice were just little tiny things, no bigger than your little finger. And all these effects were lifetime benefits of this approach of stimulating your immune system to deal naturally with the cancer. Interestingly enough, I was thrown out of the School of Medicine at 24 weeks when we had a 90% response rate and all the controls were gone. And they brought in Jane Haney for a heinous suppression of our work from the FDA to do it. Interesting thing about this is that this is the response with natural vitalithine, but if you add dead cancer cells to the mix, it completely poisons that, no better than the dead cancer cells themselves. And we found out by increasing the dose that the dead cancer cells were poisoning vitalithine. And I'm going to back up on that one because this is an important point. I went too far. You can tell I'm technologically challenged. The dead cancer cells here, however, had no effect. So this is why this already activated Trojan horse-like version of this compound is so important, and that's why we made 6 million doses of that available this summer, because it was 90% effective even when you have cancer still in your body in substantial quantities. The interesting thing about this is that because we can work now with the tumor burden, we can kind of extrapolate what we need to do to clean up the environment. As little as 10 femtograms of environmental toxins will poison this system. This is flanked on either side by the amount of plutonium and aflatoxin that causes cancer. So this is probably the molecule in the body that gets poisoned. We do have protective mechanisms, but when they get saturated, such as the metallothionein, then we have problems. So here's the good enzyme right here. It needs oxygen and all the B vitamins, especially pantothenic acid, which I've already mentioned, and cysteine, so that it can turn off the enzyme that makes cholesterol and activates cancer oncogenes. And these are the things that the cancer needs to grow. Every time a cancer cell divides, it needs 25% more cholesterol. And when the cancer genes get activated at the same time, then it's off and running and you're in trouble. We can turn that off in the test tube and with these compounds that we're developing. This is the Trojan horse molecule. Essentially, we took the sulfanic acid and put two molecules in the same little molecular compartment and stuck benzyl groups on the end so that it can get into the cell. You've seen benzoic acid as a preservative in a lot of foods, and it is in a lot of foods naturally. So this doesn't impart anything toxic to the body. It's basically breaking down into a natural substance inside the cells. And this enzyme has already been associated with the control of sugar metabolism, with HMG or cholesterol production, hormonal production. Some of our speakers had already talked about horrible hormonal problems that we're experiencing. But the real interesting thing is that I did my dissertation on the thyroid, and if this is out of control, you have delirium, schizophrenia, hallucinations, mania, seizures, myxedema, and anxiety. So if you think of resuscitating somebody after they drown, do you go up there and just start blowing in their lungs first off the bat? No, you get the water out first. We have to get the toxins out of our environment before any of this is going to work. Otherwise, all the high-dollar expensive foods that we might want to put in there, or the efforts that we have to create a sustainable agricultural society, are going to be wasted in the mafioso sense by the toxins in our body. One of the critical ones is oxygen. Everybody talks about global warming CO2, but you know what disappears when you make CO2 from fossil fuels? Oxygen. What's the thing you need that is most essential to stay alive? Oxygen. You can only go without oxygen for about 2 or 3 minutes and you're gone. In graduate school, I was standardizing to 20%. And if you notice, this is taken from the amber in that the insects flapping around in the tree sap produced, the little bubbles in amber way back in the dinosaur period, so they can actually track what happened to the oxygen. And in the high altitude cities, it's actually dropping to 12 to 15%. So if we continue to burn our oxygen and kill the trees and the algae and everything else in our environment that replenishes that oxygen, we're just going to be snuffed out, not as a species, but all of the mammals on this planet. And it's going to be precipitous, because when oxygen becomes deficient in our environment, it actually, we start producing carbon monoxide instead of oxygen, which poisons our hemoglobin, so even if there's oxygen there, we can't get it to our critical tissues to keep us alive. So we've got a problem here. And as long as we continue to burn fossil fuels, we're going to continue to have the problem. I was heartened to see people using horses in this group to farm with again. Because, yeah, you get some methane and you get some gas byproducts from horses, but you also get incredible amounts of manure that you can use to sustain your agricultural efforts in a great way. Now, this is an important slide because this breaks down in simple terms the chemistry that we're going to be talking about. First of all, indole analogs of melatonin and serotonin are dangerous. Ethoxyquin is put in dog foods and cat foods and in some of our herbs and spices. How do you avoid those? Fresh herbs and spices that you grow yourself or that you buy from Tzuka Pueblo. The indoles, as it turns out, are carcinogenic. LSD is an indole. So the medical and pharmaceutical industry, which I will sometimes refer to as the Pharmageddon people, Pharmageddon, they actually use this information that they probably got from the CIA after they did a number on the KGB with that. And not only that, but did anybody know that the CIA actually poisoned the water supply in the FBI headquarters? For fun or to see what happened, but essentially they are on record for doing that. And the CIA is what brought crack cocaine to LA in the Iran-Contra scandal. So don't kid yourself, the CIA is in the drug business. the people that were convicted by a jury of their peers of federal crimes in that matter were pardoned by the Bush administration. The interesting thing about this, that wasn't political, that was a statement of fact. The interesting thing about this, there are some other sleepers in our environment. For instance, anytime you see what they call a ketone with a double bond to oxygen off of a carbon, and there's a proton right next to this, this is potentially very dangerous. Because what happens is this can rearrange and react with Vitalathine's sulfonic acid, the same one that we're replenishing with the Trojan horse molecule, and poison that substance in the body. So examples of this are mycotoxins, mace, vitamin C, diaminone, aflatoxins, mold toxins, in other words. How do you avoid molds? Fresh foods that you grow yourself or that you get from Tezuki Pueblo. And I don't mean, I'm just going to use, when I say Tezuki Pueblo, I'm not belittling or minimizing that. It's just as gratitude to the governors and the elders of Tezuki Pueblo that recognized how important this is. But get your local produce producers in season. Ralph Nader wrote a book way back in the 80s called Eating Clean. His recommendation way back then was eat local produce in season. The other problem is rancid fat. How do you avoid rancid fat? Well, first of all, you get a lot of antioxidants, fresh berries. The Lakota Sioux make wasna from crushing primarily choke cherries into their jerky so that the choke cherries preserve the bison. You don't need refrigeration. Stick it in your pocket and you're off and running, which enables you to catch more buffalo and gather more choke cherries. So we're going to talk about a lot about buffalo as being one way of avoiding this. Examples of this are mold toxins again. How do you avoid mold? Toxic metals, radiation. If you don't have enough antioxidants in your diet, you actually make these toxins in your body. Your fat goes rancid. And some people, there's rumors that you spontaneously ignite, which is just an oxidation of your fat carried to an extreme. Taking a shower with chlorine coming out of the tap. And any organic matter, especially when the chlorine hits your skin, is going to make alkyl chlorides and alkyl halides of all kinds, which are known to be carcinogenic. And then it turns out many chemotherapies do this. Many chemotherapies are failed chemical warfare agents. Failed in the sense that they didn't want to use it in a warfare sense, but maybe they want to use it in a sense to knock us off. Anyway. And then, as it turns out, things that kind of look like parts of Vitalatine, there's a thing called competitive inhibition in biochemistry, where things that look like Mother Nature actually poison Mother Nature. Remember the old margarine commercials? It's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. And what were they hawking? Hydrogenated fat that is trans and deadly to us. But because they told us it was not nice to fool with Mother Nature, that was a legal disclaimer. We went ahead and ate the products anyway, and it gave us cancer, heart disease, diabetes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and a host of other industrialized diseases. But we can't sue them because they warned us on TV. Now, so these are chemicals that we consider to be environmental hazards actually include a bunch of drugs. Drugs are metabolic poisons. They are designed to poison pathways in our body. They are environmental toxins that we have to be careful about, especially when you consider that all these things go down the sewer after people consume them. And if the water treatment plants aren't taking those out specifically, including the metal toxins, they wind up in our drinking water supplies. So these are very serious problems. And then we talked a little bit about oxygen running out, or vitamins like niacinamide, which are vitamin B3 that are important for these pathways to work, being poisoned by nicotine from tobacco products. radiation, chemical warfare, chemotherapies, these are all in the same categories. And I took some time on this slide because if you want to remember the things that are important here, look for this slide because it has the chemistry as simple as I can make it in terms of getting it all together on one page. So hopefully we'll get to our other pages here now, and I'll show you the evidence for this. Okay, are we on a timer? Here we go. Anybody wonder why we had a civil war? Anybody see what might have caused that? Wool top hats, mercury sizing. That's where Matt is a hatter comes from. Because the hatter would lick his finger and straighten the brim on the top hats and become so toxic with mercury that he went crazy. Our nation went crazy. We had brothers fighting brothers, family members fighting family, and friends fighting each other. And if you combine that with gold poisoning, if you don't believe me that gold is a toxin, this came out of an old text for actually dealing with toxins. And BAL, or British anti-leukocyte factor, is a specific antidote for arsenic, mercury, gold, antimony, bismuth, nickel, and copper. Those guys are a good thing to remember because this may be what's responsible for a lot of health problems. British anti-leukocyte factor is to block the chemical warfare agent. So there's the connection there with the chemical warfare agents. Now my palms were 10 times worse than this when I had nickel poisoning. I couldn't use my left elbow. I had insomnia. I had horrible heartburn. I was getting about 2 hours of sleep a night. Blood in my stools, difficulty urinating, hypocoagulable blood, a host of problems. Dermatologists actually intentionally poisoned his patients with carcinogenic nickel to prove that it would cause that rash. And we actually have someone in the conference here who has a rash that indicates nickel poisoning, which is this characteristic pompoloxy. So if you ever have little pinhead-sized blisters and hairlines, or anywhere you sweat, different people sweat in different ways. Men tend to sweat on their scalp, guys, and nickel poisons hair follicles. I met a lady who had no eyebrows, and she had metal all over the back of her eyeglass frames. So poisoning, whether intentional or not, is happening, and we need to probably put a stop to it. Now, this is the Niosh Handbook. The government knows this, yet the FDA still mandates that all our food, beverages, and pharmaceuticals be processed in carcinogenic stainless steel. Nickel causes sensitizing dermatitis, allergic asthma, nasal cavities, pneumonitis, and cancer. And its target organs are nasal cavities, lungs, and skin. Well, there's your lung cancer connection. As it turns out, we get rid of nickel by sweating and through the stools. And since it's absorbing right back into those tissues, it's like a carcinogenic tattoo in the colon and in the stools. Now, David Lawrence did a very interesting set of experiments. He showed that you could completely poison the ability of our bodies to make antibodies to kill cancer cells and infectious cells by just putting chelators in there. Has anybody noticed how interested the doctors are suddenly getting in chelation therapies? Unfortunately, the chelation therapies that they use, that they give you orally or inject into your bloodstream, actually just move the toxins around your body and poison everything that your body didn't want to poison, like your nervous system, your vital organs, your brain, and your immune response. What this brilliant man did, however, is he could turn it off by chelating it or trapping the different minerals, and then he added minerals back to see what the body actually needs there. One of the biggies was calcium. Very interesting, because cancer patients, when their immune system stops working and they get cancer, mobilize the bone to try to increase the blood concentrations as a way to fight this. But if you're doing that and you don't have the vitality available to activate your immune response, it's a futile gesture. So if you don't address the needs of your immune system and nourish your body, it's a futile gesture. You're going to still have problems with cancer. The toxic metals, copper, mercury, and I'm trying to remember what that was because I can't quite read it. Anyway, these other toxic metals on our list actually poison this pathway. But nickel is a big surprise because nickel is carcinogenic, and yet it's stimulating it. So, dummy me, I sit there and scratch my head for 6 months wondering what the connection is and why that's the case. But if you note, it overstimulates your immune system. Hence the hypersensitivity and overactive immune system that's so busy worrying about stuff that it doesn't need to worry about, that it actually misses the cancer when it comes along. So, whoops, we don't want to do that. That's what we want to do. Let's make sure we didn't miss a slide. Okay. So the nice thing about this is we can actually look at the chemistry. A lot of information is available, and we can look at the size and the charge, and for the entire chemical periodic table, we can sort out what the bad ones are and what the good ones are. So who knows what Dell is doing now? Anyway, potassium is one of these lines. I think it's re-signaling here. I'll just talk about this while it's playing. All right, stop. Do you know what's happening? Oh, launching both. Okay. Sorry about that. Isn't modern technology marvelous? Incidentally, that's a good time to talk about stress. 85% of disease, according to the CDC, is caused by stress. Oh, gee, do you think maybe gardening might be a good way to do away with that? Anyway, potassium is one of the lines, calcium is one of the lines, and magnesium is one of the lines. These three nutrients we have to have. If you have too little or too much potassium, you'll have a heart disease and muscle cramps, or a heart attack and muscle cramps, and it'll kill you. If you don't have calcium, we already seen your immune system shuts down, and if you don't have magnesium, your bones fall apart. So we can go through here and cherry pick. Here's gold right there, poisoning potassium. Again, I apologize. Then it turns out that too much sodium in your diet is actually good advice, too much salt, because it poisons calcium, but so does cadmium, which Leona mentioned yesterday is one of the things she's talking about. And it turns out bismuth and mercury and lead, all these things probably are poisoning calcium and winding up in our bones and teeth, so that none of these things work. My nemesis was nickel, however. It's a little bit bigger than magnesium, and aluminum is a little smaller. So when I started pulling the nickel out and putting magnesium back, my body started dumping aluminum in huge amounts, clear off the charts. So magnesium is important for another reason. I don't know why we're in this vicious loop. But one of the critical things that we need magnesium for is to make neurotransmitters. As it turns out, when we have too much cell-mediated immunity and not much of this antibody response and not enough magnesium, instead of making tetrahydrobiopterin, we make neopterin, and we can't even make neurotransmitters. And we can't use tryptophan in the protein that we eat to make serotonin and melatonin, which are our feel-goods, and sleep hormones. So we can't sleep, and we don't feel good. Not a good place to be. Now, this is a diagram of how tryptophan in a healthy person would be utilized with tetrahydrobiopterin to make serotonin and melatonin, the good hormones. But if we don't have that, as it turns out, and we're not eating enough apple pectin with our Thanksgiving turkey. Little clue here. Apple pectin prevents this bad reaction. Then we make a substance called kynurenine, which is carcinogenic and deadly to us. So, I went too far again. I should just let this thing do its thing and not play with it. So serotonin and melatonin are actually very important in that we can identify these indoles to where they, the good indoles are good for us, the bad indoles aren't. LSD, some people would argue with me, but I'd say in general I would avoid it. So kynurenine actually goes here, and the Krebs cycle intermediates help us get rid of this. So if you have good energy from good food going into your body, it will help you deal with this. And if you eat apple pectin, it shuts down this bad enzyme here that would otherwise turn this into something that's carcinogenic and very problematic. So we're back to the good indole slide, and it turns out we could even find indoles like this that look like melatonin and serotonin intermediates that have this 6-ring and 5-ring, but this actually promotes cancer. This is the preservative, ethoxyquin, that looks like the right stuff, but it actually is accelerating the cancer growth so that we can't stop it with the therapies that we're developing to use the natural parts of the body. And it turns out all these indoles here, again, 6 and 5-member rings, all these different compounds have this indole structure. Guess what? They're all carcinogenic. They all got problems. So there's a signature molecule here to watch out for. Old railroad ties have indoles. And one of the things that is good for us about fruit is it keeps our bowels moving. If we get stagnant bowels, that actually is also carcinogenic. It builds up bad bile acid metabolites. Now, what's cool is we've been able to actually start plotting this data, and we're getting pretty linear expressions here so that we can actually start looking at all these little different metals, and we can tell which ones are most dangerous and why. And part of that is the more oxidized they get, the more toxic they get. So we need antioxidants in our diet. They're very important. Chromate, manganese, things that we might not think are that dangerous are actually. And nickel, cobalt, and chromium are all down here in the gutter. When you start looking at the safety data for elements in the workplace, the government already knows all this. So things like titanium backpacking cookware or glass cooktop, like the old Corning Visions, cast iron, carbon steel pans, you want to use these because they have a greater safety, whereas these other elements and chemicals are in the gutter. What is beautiful about nature and earth, and I passed around this thing, they're talking about the gift of the earth. This is what I was working on when I got this letter from the Lakota elders, is that diatomaceous earth pulls these toxins back out of our body naturally. Never gets into our bloodstream, never mobilizes the toxins. It just gradually siphons and leaches it out of our bodies. From an agricultural standpoint, it kills bugs, but makes us healthier. Now, doesn't that sound like a good pesticide to be using on your farms instead of the chemical ones? And there's another natural miracle. It's called coconut oil. Everybody's heard, oh, well, coconut oil is saturated fat. Oh, it's bad for you, bad. But you know who's telling you that? The soy industry that's giving you unsaturated fat that goes rancid. And that's hydrogenated with carcinogenic nickel catalysts, which then oxidize and give you epoxides and other bad things in your body. So it turns out when your body gets oxidative stress, it turns it into very problematic substances. Coconut oil by itself kills a whole bunch of viruses, even the AIDS virus, and a whole bunch of bacteria, gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. And it's the only thing I've found that pulls methylated toxins like dimethyl mercury and dimethyl arsenic and probably dimethyl bismuth out of the fat in our bodies. So if you want to use a systemic chelator, it's as simple as coconut oil that your body turns into monolaurin. The best I found is from a company called Wilderness Family Naturals, I'm sorry. Wilderness Family Naturals centrifuged coconut oil. Oops. I don't know why I pointed at the screen all the time. Now, we've had AIDS patients that have so much candida, it's called thrush. I call it from anus to appetite throughout their alimentary tract, that they came out here to New Mexico to die with their family. And as it turns out, we put them on coconut oil and diatomaceous earth, and in a matter of weeks it was gone. Diatomaceous earth is just a little silica shell that microbes in freshwater lakes near volcanic deposits produced many eons ago, and they're actually still producing it. The largest lake in the world, Lake Baikal in the Soviet Union, has these microbes in it. Lake Baikal is interesting because none of the organisms, all the way from seals to fish and anything else in the area, are so used to pristine, pure environments, because the diatoms are taking out the environmental toxins, that they don't have any other mechanism for dealing with pollutants. So the Soviet Union made the mistake of putting a lumber mill on the shores of that lake, and almost overnight, all these organisms started developing strange cancers and strange things and dying off in great numbers because they evolved in a place that was clean. We did too, but we've had many millennia of being poisoned with metals. Yeah. Anybody, I'm open for any of this later. The trick though, is to probably stay with the short chain saturated fat, because the short chain saturated fat is not so much of a problem. Our body just burns that for energy. Long chain saturated fats, yeah, you may want to kind of ease off on those. But you probably really want to avoid the unsaturated fats. Now, and specifically avoid soy products. There are no safe soy products except fermented ones. And even the fermented ones, you need to know what you're doing there and try to stay with something like miso, which is fermented for 3 years. Just like aged cheeses are better for us than the processed cheeses that are toxic. It turns out that soy actually has a thing called quercetin. Remember the little enol thing I showed you earlier? It causes cancer because it poisons vitality. Now, the way to keep unsaturated fat from going bad on you is very interesting, because something in sesame seed oil called sesamin actually prevents that. But sesame seed oil, uncooked, is actually carcinogenic. It's got sesamol and a bunch of these other ring structures that look like the right stuff, but actually wind up poisoning the good pathway. The best source of sesamin that we found is Siberian ginseng, or Uleotherococcus senticosus, which is what the FDA makes us call it. So the reason, again, is that we're poisoning these little molecules in this enzyme, and we're setting up this precipitous cascade to give us cholesterol problems, heart disease, and cancer. And even too much vitamin C does the same thing, and that it wipes out beta-carotene sulfonic acid right there and shuts down this process. So too much vitamin C is bad for you because vitamin C has this same enol. When we get oxidative stress and unsaturated fats dominating our diet, this enol right here, that is in equilibrium back and forth between the malondialdehyde that we produce under oxidative stress, that poisons the vitality modulators and poisons your ability of your immune system to fight anything, including cancer. So how much of a problem is this? Well, insidious about this is that when metal toxins get together with the kynurenine because we don't have enough apple pectin and other fruit pectins in our diet, then the metals pull this into the enol tautomer and make the kynurenine even more toxic to these compounds that we're talking about, the ones that we were using to treat cancer effective. So get the metals out and get the apple pectin in and get high quality protein in there that has cysteine, not soy protein. Here's an example. Mold toxins poison us this way. So if we increase the activity of this, then we can tolerate a few mold insults and we won't get deathly ill from this. But you'll see the enol here and here. You can see that how these molecules tend to wipe out several vitalithines with just one molecule. It turns out that phoryl esters promote cancer. They do the same thing. It's the same chemistry. Once it forms the enol, then it reacts with vitalithine and it poisons our immune systems. The other thing that's like this is, interestingly, mace. They used to train all our military to make them breathe this stuff until they could get their gas mask on. Mace is insidious because it can take out 3 molecules of the good stuff with 1 molecule of the bad stuff. So is it any wonder they phased mace out as a protective spray and use pepper spray now instead? We can tolerate a little more capsaicin in the pepper spray than we can this, although the capsaicin is carcinogenic by itself because of these same problems. And some of you may know about Taxol that was heralded as an extract of the Pacific yew tree for breast cancer patients. It was an abysmal failure in terms of providing any benefit. Probably because although it can recycle some of the good stuff, some of the vitalithine, it has a tendency to bind up about 4 vitalithines per molecule and uncouple your immune response. So we're back to this situation where we want to turn on the good enzyme so we can turn off the bad enzyme. This is a metabolic switch that we can use to our advantage. All we have to do is nourish it. We need oxygen, all the B vitamins, B2, B3, B5, B6, B12, folic acid, and as it turns out, B15, which has dimethylglycine that increases this enzyme. We also want to increase this enzyme with hormones like progesterone, but not with estrogen and testosterone. The estrogen and testosterone are counterproductive, and things like chasteberry, interestingly enough, will help even women who can't conceive. 15 women who could not conceive with anything the doctor was doing for them went on chasteberry for about 3 months. At the end of 3 months, 5 of them were pregnant. Now they say don't use chasteberry when you're pregnant, but if you have increased progesterone, which is what chasteberry tends to do, your children will be more intelligent when they're born, and your fibrosis of the uterine and breast go away as a side effect of this. Now, again, we need the good stuff in, we need the bad stuff out. N-acetylcysteine, I call the nasty, for NAC, nasty form of cysteine because, whoops, I thought I paused that, I'm sorry. Wrong way. Oh, wrong button. I just wanted to show you. The thing about this is that it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. This is what our body needs. And this is what they've tried to use for a drug. Homocysteine accumulates trying to make this if you don't have enough cysteine in your diet. And penicillamine comes from mold. Then the pharmaceutical people have been duping the health food industry to promote NAC, a pharmaceutical version of cysteine instead. But because it has the carboxy group in there, it looks like vitalithine and inhibits these pathways. So what will cysteine alone do for us? Well, some brilliant Japanese researchers showed that just increasing dietary cysteine 0.3% made cholesterol problems go away in rats fed high cholesterol diets. And not only that, but the LDL and triglycerides dropped like a rock, and HDL went up. It did everything right. Soy protein caused HDL to go down. Remember I said soy protein's dangerous? What's the best form we found? Bison. Picaris Pueblo raises bison. I would encourage every Native American tribe to, if you have any area at all that you can do that, to raise bison, and I'll show you why. This was the fish of the plains for the Native Americans. There weren't that many fish, but it turns out bison have 10 times the omega, or the DHA and EPA that feedlot beef has. So I'm going to give you a whole bunch of comparisons. It turns out the bison was broiled, just like the Native Americans did, with rocks in the stomachs of the buffalo, so that the hot rocks would heat up, slowly heat up the water and very slowly cook the bison over poles. And I was talking to some of the Native Americans here about that historical way of cooking it. That's a far better way of cooking it. So we're comparing this, the best and the worst scenario. It turns out bison is richer in tryptophan, lysine, arginine, but especially cysteine, that makes the vitality to make strong muscles, insulin, serum albumin, metallothionein, and other glutathione, and a lot of very critical nutrients that you have. So it's not just a little bit, it's like half again as much. It's much better than beef. If we look at the vitamins, on average, it's at least 2 times as much of the B vitamins that I said were important. But in the case of pantothenic acid, it's much more than that. It's 3 to 4 times as much pantothenic acid. So it's no small wonder that bison don't get cancer, and according to every grower that I've talked to. And one elderly Native American actually had bison fat put in where the doctor took the tumor out, and his cancer went away, much to the surprise of everyone. Bison has unusual fats. It has odd number fats, 15 and 17. We're not sure what the significance of this is, but it's much higher in bison than feedlot beef. It has more DHA and EPA, more on the order of 10 times as much. And the ratio of omega-3s, which are good for us, to omega-6s, which are problematic, are something like 3 times better in the bison. So on every nutritional front that we've examined, it's better. The reason this is important is cysteine is what we're trying to get out of this pathway. And when our body doesn't have that, it tries to make homocysteine from methionine through this god-awful convoluted pathway. And as soon as homocysteine hits metal toxins, it produces a doubly toxic substance. They're co-contaminants in our body. So if you try to get rid of homocysteine by getting rid of the metals, then the metals get you. And if you try to get rid of the metals by getting rid of homocysteine, no, the homocysteine gets you. Anyway, you get one, the other one gets you. Actually, homocysteine under acidic conditions or when there's metal toxins will form a dimer that looks very much like vitality. Again, so it's not nice to mess with Mother Nature. Close only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and nuclear warheads. It doesn't count in biochemistry. You have to have precisely what you need. And when you get precisely what you need, we've made cancers, this is a myeloma, as big as the mouse itself, melt away precipitously in a matter of about 2 weeks. Now, this wasn't a happy mouse. He was sick because he was absorbing the human equivalent of about a bowling ball of cancer every day. But if you do it in a more gradual and easy way, you can actually do some pretty miraculous things with the immune system. Now, we know about vaccination. This has been around for a long time. 1978, this came out of an immunology text. If you activate the immune system once, you produce IgM. If you then activate it with the same thing the second time around, then instead of a response of 1, you get a response of 1,000. How many out there, if you get cancer, would like to have an immune system that's 1,000 times better than it is now? I would. In fact, just walking around every day, I'd rather have that. If you don't have cysteine, you cannot make the things for capsaces to work upon, or caspases, I should say. Caspases are part of the cascade that kills the cancer cell naturally. The reason cancer cells don't die naturally is they don't have enough cysteine to make the protein that the caspases act upon. So the cancer cells don't have the machinery because we don't get enough cysteine in our diet. Now, Vitalithine does something else interesting. It actually activates red blood cell production. We've proven that. And all these red blood cells came from the same stem cells as our entire immune system, so we can actually increase the immune cells and stabilize those immune cells if we nourish this pathway. If we poison it, we're in trouble. So this is just the erythropoiesis. We can show that we can dramatically turn red blood cell production on and off. Douglas Clark at the VA that did these experiments said, I have people out here at the VA that die every day that this stuff would help. And if you just put carbon dioxide, if you get exercise, put carbon dioxide on the end of this molecule, you can go from beta-allothine that works at 100 micrograms per kilogram to Vitalithine that works at 100 femtograms per kilogram. 15 minus 6 is 9. It's 1 billion times more potent. Exercise increases your oxygen content and helps make the 1 billion times more potent Vitalithine. If you put Vitalithine in cell culture, the cells actually stabilize in culture where the other ones die out. And I'll show you a higher magnification of that. The cells that are still there without Vitalithine are actually eating themselves, just trying to stay alive. So that's very important. As it turns out, in AIDS, Vitalithine activates antibody production dramatically in the AIDS model at the University of Arizona. On the left was without infection, on the right was with. It doesn't really do anything except shut down the division of the B cells and the cancer. It just stops division. Stops division would be a good thing in cancer, would it not? So when you stop the division of cells and make them do what they're supposed to do, you actually come out ahead. So we can increase this function of the cell without increasing the division of the cell. This is true for the T cells as well. So your immune system stops dividing and starts working. What a concept. Too bad we can't get our bureaucrats and some of our politicians to do the same thing. And as it turns out, interleukin-2, which activates the proliferation, shuts down. And interferon gamma, which does the same thing, shuts down. So across the board, this is good for just making your cells do what they want. Now, interesting, TNF-alpha kills virally infected cells and helps kill cancer cells and prevents diabetes, but the virus infection actually makes that go down, and the Vitalithine actually restores that. So that's a good thing from that perspective, and also in preventing diabetes in predisposed animals. Interleukin-6 does the same thing. Vitalithine increases it, and it blocks diabetes. The cool thing about the Vitalithine is it increases the two things that block diabetes at the same time, which the medical and pharmaceutical industry aren't doing. We don't know. Be nice to find out. You know, it doesn't hurt to eat buffalo because we know Native Americans didn't have diabetes. They were formidable before they killed all the buffalo. So the cool thing, too, is that we know something that is critical to nourish this system that is not in the IV feeds they give you at the hospital. And just a week in the hospital, this is what happens to your good enzyme. Yet when they give this extract of rat chow back, which comes from nuts and seeds and fruit, sounds like a hunter-gatherer diet, doesn't it? Then that goes away. In the old days, the same guys that discovered Laetrile or amygdalin actually discovered vitamin B15 or pangamic acid. And it was all legitimate for a long time, like 50 years. And in fact, they even say in the old Merck Index it treats cardiovascular disease and rheumatoid arthritis. But after a paper came out in 1981 showing that it increases the immune system on average in humans 4 to 5 times, and in some people 170 times, then suddenly the FDA and the Merck industry, pharmaceutical industry, changed their tune. And the very next article I'm having after this is the one right before that article. Everything was still legitimate. The very next article suddenly said pandemic acid is bad for us. That is controversial, and it's supposedly there, but they can't find it. So the other thing that's very interesting is 85% of cancers are being treated by the Cojones in Hawaii using turmeric and volcanic minerals. Turmeric actually naturally regulates the body and makes your cortisol levels come up right in the morning when they're supposed to, instead of in the middle of the afternoon when your doctor gives you that cortisol shot. So you can actually integrate what we're doing here with an understanding of why natural medicines work so much better and keep us so much healthier than the others. And I want to end with this little observation that we made about soy. Turns out phosphocreatine is the major pH and energy buffer in every cell of our body. What happens to cancer patients? They go acidotic. Their pH drops because they don't have the energy buffer in their cell. I remember I warned you against soy as not being a good source of cysteine. Soy kills 86% of your thymus. It's more toxic to your thyroid than the anti-thyroid medications. It's not a good source of cysteine, and it has more estrogenic-like substances than most anything that the medical people will prescribe for you. The Weston Price people did an estimate on how much a baby gets when you put them on soy formula. It's the equivalent of 4 to 5 doses of birth control pills on soy formula. So, I'm sorry, this is still cycling. The problem is glyphosate, which is Roundup, that they're spraying on these GMO soybeans, looks a lot like phosphocreatine. And remember, anything that looks like the right stuff and isn't actually poisons our natural pathways. And as it turns out, phosphopentoic acid and phosphopantothenic acid are used to make vitality. So right here, the broadcast spraying of all this crap on our food, in our environment, to the point that it's killing all the natural species and heritage plants, is literally, could be also poisoning the very pathway that we need to survive and to control cancer, heart disease, diabetes, chronic fatigue, and just about every industrialized society disease known to man, as well as our ability to defend ourselves against all these emerging pathogens that are becoming more toxic and resistant to antibiotics. So I'm going to end that for now, and thank you very much for your attention.